The walls have crumbled, the gates have been consumed by fire. Jerusalem, the soul of Israel, has been in ruins for centuries. Yet there was just one who stood at the edge of an empire, a mere cupbearer to a foreign king who received a calling that would not only change his life, but alter the course of history forever. Nehemiah, a man not born of royal blood, but of unwavering faith and loyalty. A man chosen not for his lineage, but for his heart. And from that heart, he began a journey not merely to rebuild the walls of a city, but to restore the very foundation of faith and justice itself. But this is not a simple story of construction. This is the story of belief, of resilience in the face of insurmountable odds. A story of a man who dared to answer a divine call when all seemed lost. Before we dive into this incredible tale, I invite you to step into a world long forgotten, into the shadow of secrets hidden for centuries. What we are about to uncover is not just Nehemiah's journey. It is our journey too, a journey of faith, redemption, and the courage to rebuild the broken pieces of our own lives. Let's discover how one man, a simple servant, became the architect of a nation's revival. How Nehemiah faced every challenge and transformed an entire people. But the question remains, can faith truly change the course of history? On an unforgettable day, Nehemiah stood at the crossroads of destiny. A simple cupbearer in the court of King Artaxerxes, Nehemiah had no claim to power, no royal blood to stake his claim. Yet his heart burned with a passion for his homeland. Jerusalem, the city in ruins, the walls shattered, the gates turned to ash. It was here in the heart of the Persian Empire that Nehemiah found himself staring into the abyss of history, waiting for a single moment that could change everything. King Artaxerxes, noticing the sorrow etched upon Nehemiah's face, asked the simple question that would open the floodgates of destiny. "Why are you so sad?" For most, this would have been a passing inquiry, but for Nehemiah, it was the moment that would shape the future. With courage burning in his chest, he answered. His voice steady, but his heart racing, he spoke the words that would echo through time. "Give me permission to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem." That simple request, though it may seem ordinary, was anything but. It was not just a request, it was a declaration of faith, a declaration of responsibility. Nehemiah, a mere servant, was about to change the course of history, not through military might or royal decree, but through his unshakable belief that the divine could guide him to rebuild not only a city, but a nation. The king's response was nothing short of miraculous. Artaxerxes, who ruled over the vast Persian Empire, could have dismissed Nehemiah as a mere servant with a foolish dream. But instead, he granted Nehemiah not only permission, but the resources, supplies, protection, and the power to rebuild. A man who had spent his life in the shadows of a foreign court was now entrusted with the monumental task of restoring the glory of Jerusalem. The request of one man at the right moment had shifted the fate of an entire people. Artaxerxes, the king who once held Nehemiah's life in his hands, had now become the instrument of divine providence. The unthinkable had happened. A cupbearer was empowered, a nation was given a second chance, and the future of Jerusalem was in motion. But how did this man born into captivity rise to such heights of courage? This was more than a mere request. This was an invitation to the impossible. Nehemiah had asked not for riches, not for power, but for a chance to rebuild, to restore, to bring a broken city back to life. A chance to answer the call of his ancestors and the call of God. But the real question is how many of us would have the courage to ask for something so audacious, knowing the weight of the responsibility that followed. You can feel the weight of Nehemiah's words, can't you? His courage, his unshakable faith. It begs the question how many of us would dare to stand in the face of overwhelming odds and ask for something so bold, so transformative. What is your Nehemiah moment? Share your thoughts with us and let's reflect together on the power of making a decision that can change not only your life, but the lives of many. Nehemiah's request had been granted, but the journey was just beginning. What awaited him in Jerusalem was not a city waiting to be rebuilt, but a people in despair, a city in ruins. How would Nehemiah face the challenges that lay ahead? The walls were broken, but so too was the spirit of the people. and Nehemiah's greatest test was yet to come. Now, with permission in hand, Nehemiah sets forth, but his journey to rebuild the walls is not one of haste or blind optimism. No, the true test of his leadership will come not in the strength of his hands, but in the wisdom of his heart. The walls of Jerusalem may have been in ruins, but so too was the spirit of its people. How would Nehemiah inspire them? What sacrifices would be demanded? What dangers would he face? The answers lie just beyond the horizon. Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, but he did not rush into action. For 3 long days he remained silent, observing the ruined city without revealing his true intentions. This pause was not a sign of hesitation, but a reflection of wisdom, a deep understanding of the importance of timing. In the stillness, Nehemiah knew that to act too quickly would be a mistake, for the city of Jerusalem was more than just stones and mortar. It was a heart broken and weary, in desperate need of healing. On the 4th day, Nehemiah finally spoke. With a clear vision burning in his heart, he gathered the leaders of Jerusalem. His words, though few, cut through the layers of despair that had settled over the people like a fog. "The walls of Jerusalem are in ruins," he said, "but together we can rebuild." Nehemiah's vision was not merely about physical reconstruction. This was a revolution of the spirit, a call for unity, for the restoration of faith, and for the rekindling of hope. It was a plan to rebuild not just walls, but the very soul of the city. In that moment, Nehemiah understood the power of vision, how it could transcend mere mortar and brick to ignite something far greater. The people of Jerusalem, battered and disheartened, looked upon the ruins, but now they could see something else, a future, a vision of a city restored. They were not just rebuilding walls, they were rebuilding themselves. Nehemiah's call was not one of blind optimism. It was a call to action, a rallying cry that stirred the hearts of those who had been long abandoned, forgotten by the world. The plan was set in motion. Nehemiah, the once humble cupbearer, was now their leader. But the task ahead was monumental, the challenges formidable. Would the people, broken as they were, rise to the occasion? Could they, with their hands and their faith, rebuild the walls of their city and their lives? Nehemiah knew the road ahead would be fraught with dangers. The city's enemies, watching from the outside, were already plotting against him. The people within, weary and uncertain, could easily turn against the very vision Nehemiah sought to plant. But Nehemiah understood something that few could. He understood the power of preparation. Every step, every word, every action needed to be deliberate, calculated. He knew that the first step was not the physical labor of rebuilding, but the restoration of trust, of unity. The walls would rise, but first the hearts of the people must be healed. In moments like this, we are reminded of the power of preparation. How often do we find ourselves rushing into the unknown without taking the time to reflect, to plan, to ready our hearts for what is to come? What changes in your life have required careful thought, patience, and prayer? Share with us your stories of preparation, and let's reflect on the strength that lies in being still, in waiting for the right moment to act. The plan had been laid, but as Nehemiah surveyed the people before him, he knew that the true test was still to come. Would they stand together? Would they find the strength to rise from the rubble of the past and face the future as one? The walls could only be rebuilt if their spirits were restored first. And Nehemiah, their leader, would need more than just faith. He would need to inspire them to see beyond the ruins. As Nehemiah's plan took shape, the winds of opposition began to stir. Forces outside the walls were already plotting against him, but the greatest battle would not be fought with weapons. No, the true battle would be won or lost within the hearts of those Nehemiah had come to lead. But what happens when faith is tested by mockery, by doubt, and by fear? As we turn the page, we find out. With a clear plan in place, Nehemiah began the arduous task of rebuilding Jerusalem's walls. But he was not alone in his efforts. As the work began, Nehemiah faced fierce opposition, most notably from 2 powerful figures, Sanballat, the governor of Samaria, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official. These men mocked the very idea of a city being rebuilt from the ashes. To them, Jerusalem was nothing more than a forgotten ruin, a city that had no place in the future. They ridiculed Nehemiah. They scoffed at the people. "What are these feeble Jews doing?" they sneered. "Will they restore their walls? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day?" But Nehemiah, undeterred by their scorn, stood firm. "We will rebuild this wall," he declared, his voice unwavering. It was not a boast, it was a promise. A promise rooted in faith, in the deep, unshakable belief that God was with him. Nehemiah did not seek approval from his enemies. His faith was the foundation of his leadership. While the mocking continued, Nehemiah did not falter. Instead, he focused his energy on the task at hand. He knew the walls could not be rebuilt through sheer will alone. His leadership required more than just physical labor. It required a deep understanding of the spiritual forces at play. He turned to God in prayer, seeking divine protection. And with this strength, Nehemiah took a decisive step forward. To safeguard the workers and ensure the task continued without interruption, Nehemiah devised a defensive system. He armed the laborers, setting some to work, while others stood ready with weapons, protecting the work from every angle. The work was to continue, but it was no longer just a matter of construction. It was a battle for survival, a spiritual warfare fought with both faith and action. "The God of heaven will give us success," Nehemiah boldly proclaimed. The enemies outside the walls could mock all they wanted, but Nehemiah's trust in God was unshakable. Nehemiah's plan was more than just a military strategy. It was a testament to his faith in God's promise. The workers, once discouraged by the rubble and the taunts, now found strength in their leader's unwavering confidence. They did not fight with swords alone, but with the spirit of hope. The walls began to rise stone by stone, a visible symbol of what faith could accomplish. But the opposition was relentless. Sanballat and Tobiah did not simply mock. They schemed, they threatened, they plotted. Yet Nehemiah, seeing the threats for what they truly were, empty fears, continued his work. "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome," Nehemiah urged his people. His leadership became a beacon of strength, a reminder that when God's will is at the center, no weapon formed against them could prosper. And still the questions lingered. Would the people rise up to meet this challenge? Could they hold fast to their faith in the face of such opposition? Nehemiah had given them the tools to rebuild not just the city's walls, but their spirits as well. But now he faced the greatest test of all, to lead them through the fire, to guide them not only in the building of walls, but in the restoration of their identity as God's people. In moments of opposition, Nehemiah's resolve stands as a powerful reminder. How often do we face ridicule or doubt when we take a step of faith? How often do we falter in the face of adversity? Nehemiah's strength came from his trust in God, not in his own power. Have you ever experienced a moment when your faith was tested? Share your story and let's reflect together on the strength that comes from standing firm in the face of challenge. As the walls slowly began to rise, the forces of opposition only grew stronger. Nehemiah's faith had carried them this far, but would it be enough? Would the work begun with such passion and belief be completed? The story of Jerusalem's restoration is far from over. There are still greater battles ahead, both on the walls and within the hearts of the people. Nehemiah had taken a stand against his enemies, but the true test of his leadership was only just beginning. The walls were rising, but so too was the fury of those who sought to destroy the work. How would Nehemiah face these new challenges, and would the people fortified by faith stand with him in the face of even greater peril? 52 days. In just 52 days, the walls of Jerusalem were rebuilt. A feat so extraordinary that even the enemies of Israel had no choice but to acknowledge it. The rubble that once lay in heaps, mocking the city's dreams, had been transformed into towering fortifications. The very walls that had been reduced to ash now stood as a testament to what faith, unity, and determination could accomplish. But this was not merely about stone and mortar. This was about the resurrection of a nation. A city once teetering on the brink of hopelessness was now filled with pride, with purpose, and with an unshakable sense of security. Nehemiah's leadership had turned the impossible into the possible. And it was not just the walls that were restored, but the very heart of the people. Their belief had been strengthened, their resolve fortified. Every stone that was placed, every laborer who worked under the scorching sun carried with it more than just the weight of the city's future. It carried the weight of a collective dream, a dream that had been deferred for so long but was now coming to life. Nehemiah had united a fractured and weary people, and together they had done what seemed impossible. They had rebuilt their walls. They had rebuilt their faith. As the walls rose, so did the hope of the people. The men and women who had once stood at the gates of despair now stood with their heads held high, looking upon their work with a pride they had not known for generations. This was no longer just a construction project. This was a divine restoration. The enemies who had mocked them, who had ridiculed their efforts, now found themselves in silence. The people of Jerusalem, once broken, now stood as a symbol of resilience. But even as the walls were nearing completion, Nehemiah knew that the real work was only just beginning. The city's walls might have been rebuilt, but the hearts of the people, though stronger, were still vulnerable. The external threats had not disappeared. In fact, they were growing more desperate. Sanballat and Tobiah were not the only enemies Jerusalem would face. But now the people had something they had never had before: confidence. They had tasted the power of faith in action, and they were unwilling to let that power slip away. Nehemiah, ever the strategist, knew that victory was not just about building walls. It was about securing a future. His leadership was not only in the physical construction of the city, but in the spiritual and social unity he had fostered among the people. The walls, though strong, would mean nothing if the people themselves were not strong. And so Nehemiah turned his gaze inward, focusing not just on protection, but on restoration, restoring the people to their true identity, their true calling. The walls may have been rebuilt, but Nehemiah understood that the true strength of Jerusalem lay not in its fortifications, but in the hearts of its people. The work of rebuilding had created something greater than just a safe city. It had created a community united in purpose, a people revived in their faith and their hope. But Nehemiah's leadership would soon face its greatest test. For as the city had been restored, so too would the forces that sought to destroy it rise again. In moments like this, we see the true power of unity of faith and of strategic leadership. Nehemiah's vision was not just about building walls, it was about building something far greater, restoring a broken people. What about you? What have you built in your own life that stands as a testimony to your faith? Share your thoughts with us and reflect on the strength that as the walls of Jerusalem rose, so too did the challenges Nehemiah would face. The enemies on the outside were not finished, and the spiritual challenges within the city were just beginning. What will happen when faith is tested again? Will the people remain united? And how will Nehemiah lead them through the next wave of trials? The true battle, it seems, is only just beginning. With the walls now completed, Nehemiah's greatest challenge would come not from enemies on the outside, but from within. The walls could protect them, but would their faith and unity hold strong in the face of the trials ahead? In the next part, Nehemiah will face the challenges of justice, of leadership in times of crisis, and the restoration of a just society. Nehemiah's task was far from complete. The walls of Jerusalem had risen, but the city's true restoration would come not through stone and mortar, but through the hearts of its people. Nehemiah was not only a builder of walls, he was a builder of righteousness. As he gazed upon the newly constructed fortifications, he knew that the work of rebuilding the spirit of Israel was the real challenge ahead. The people had been oppressed, exploited, and their faith had been shattered over the years. It was no longer enough to simply restore the physical structures of the city. Nehemiah turned his attention to the moral and spiritual fabric of the nation. He fought against injustice, against the heavy taxes that had crushed the poor, and against the corruption that ran through the hearts of the wealthy. The laws of Moses, once neglected, were now to be honored and reinstated. But Nehemiah's challenge was not just with external enemies. No, the real test lay within the hearts of the people. Would they heed the call to righteousness? Would they be willing to stand for justice and integrity, even when it meant confronting their own sins and failings? In a powerful moment, Nehemiah addressed the people. The cry of the oppressed had reached his ears, and now it was time to act. Why are we letting this happen? Nehemiah asked. "Why are we exploiting our own people?" His words echoed through the hearts of those who had long been silent, afraid to speak out against the injustice they had endured. And so Nehemiah set in motion a series of reforms actions, not just meant to rebuild a city, but to restore the people to their true identity. He brought justice to the courts, fought for the rights of the poor, and called on the leaders to honor the law of Moses once more. It was not enough to rebuild the walls. He knew that a just society could not be built on the foundation of oppression. Nehemiah did not act alone. He inspired a movement, a revival of faith and justice. The people who had once been disillusioned now stood alongside him, ready to make a stand. They began to restore not only the walls, but also the values that defined their identity as the people of God. This was a moment of reckoning, a moment of truth. But the road ahead was still fraught with danger. It was one thing to call for justice, but another to see it carried out. Nehemiah's reforms were met with resistance from the wealthy elite, those who had profited from the broken system. Yet Nehemiah's leadership never wavered. He knew that the foundation of any great society was not in its fortifications, but in its commitment to justice and righteousness. Just like Nehemiah, each of us has a responsibility to restore justice in our own communities. We are called to stand against the wrongs in our world, to speak out against oppression, and to fight for those who have no voice. What can you do to change the injustices around you? Share your thoughts and reflect on how you can take action in your own life to build a more just society. The walls were not just a symbol of protection, they were a symbol of a new beginning, a new chapter in the history of Israel. But Nehemiah's work was not over. The people had been restored to their rightful place in the eyes of God, but the true test was whether they could continue to live out that justice in their everyday lives. Would the renewal last, or would the temptations of corruption, greed, and selfishness pull them back into darkness? Nehemiah's reforms had taken root, but the challenges were far from over. The true battle now lay in sustaining the spiritual and social renewal he had ignited. Would the people hold on to the promises of God, and how would Nehemiah continue to lead them through the trials that lay ahead? The final phase of the restoration was yet to come. Nehemiah's legacy was not just in the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls, it was in the creation of a new community, one founded on faith, justice, and unwavering commitment to God's commandments. His leadership had ignited a spiritual revolution, a transformation that would ripple through generations. The walls of Jerusalem stood as a visible testament to his achievements, but it was the invisible walls of faith and righteousness that Nehemiah had built within the hearts of the people that would prove to be his true legacy. As the city was restored, so too was the people's devotion to God. They rediscovered the power of worship, the sanctity of the Sabbath, and the importance of spiritual integrity in every aspect of their lives. Nehemiah had led the people not only in the rebuilding of a city, but in the rebuilding of their identity. They were no longer a scattered, oppressed people, no longer slaves to their past or their enemies. They were a unified nation, restored not by their own strength, but by the faithfulness of God and the steadfast leadership of Nehemiah. But Nehemiah's work was not without cost. His reforms had stirred the hearts of those who had benefited from the corruption of the past. The wealthy elite who had exploited the poor now had to confront their own sins. The leaders who had turned a blind eye to injustice were now being held accountable. Nehemiah's bold leadership had created a ripple effect, a revolution of both the heart and the nation. In a moment of deep reflection, Nehemiah stood before the people, reminding them of the covenant they had made with God. They had promised to follow his laws, to honor the Sabbath, and to live with integrity. But it was not enough to simply hear the words. Nehemiah called them to action. His leadership had shown them that true transformation came when faith was not just a belief, but a living, breathing force in their daily lives. Nehemiah's reforms brought with them a cleansing, a purification not just of the city, but of the hearts of its people. The people had recommitted to the law of Moses not as a set of rules, but as a guide to living a life of justice and holiness. This was a revival, a return to the very heart of God's plan for Israel. And it was Nehemiah's leadership that had made it all possible. Yet as the walls stood firm and the people began to thrive, Nehemiah knew that true leadership was not about constructing something physical, but about leaving a foundation that would endure for generations. His vision was not only for the here and now, but for the future. He had restored the city, but he had also laid the groundwork for a society grounded in faith, justice, and communal responsibility. As Nehemiah prepared to leave, his heart was heavy knowing that the journey was far from over. The people had been given the tools to live according to God's will, but the responsibility was now in their hands. The question remained, would they uphold the vision Nehemiah had set before them? Would they continue to walk in the faith that had brought them this far? His leadership had laid the path, but it was up to them to walk it. Nehemiah's legacy is a powerful reminder for us all. It's not enough to build walls, we must build lives rooted in faith, justice, and integrity. What will be your legacy? What kind of community are you helping to build in your own life? Reflect on Nehemiah's journey and think about how you can make a lasting impact on the world around you. The walls had been rebuilt, the people had been restored. But as Nehemiah left his mark on the world, the real question was, would the people continue to honor the legacy he had given them? The story of Nehemiah is not just the story of a man, it is the story of a people who chose to rebuild, to restore, and to live with faith. And as we close this part, we are reminded that the legacy of faith is never truly finished. It continues to grow, to inspire, and to transform. As Nehemiah's time in Jerusalem came to a close, his legacy would live on in the hearts and lives of the people. The walls he built would stand for centuries, but it is the faith he instilled in the people that would be their true strength for generations to come.